Hi, and welcome back to our series on Leading with Impact. I'm your host, Samantha Brighton. Today, I'm joined by Vivian Mabuni, national speaker, author of Warrior in Pink, and Open Hands, Willing Heart. Vivian is passionate about leadership, diversity, and has a vision for global leadership. Thanks so much for joining us today, Vivian.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'm going to get right into it. And I want to know, as a leader, you have had the opportunity to realize your own personal vulnerabilities. What advice do you have for other leaders to embrace vulnerability?
You know, it's interesting. I think when I think about leadership, vulnerability is usually not something that we couple with leadership. And yet vulnerability is the place where we as leaders actually make connection with others. And that's an element in leadership, I think, that is so incredibly valuable. Vulnerability in this day and time right now, we're being exposed through COVID-19. Everything is affecting everything else. And so when we recognize and embrace that, it actually enhances the humanity piece of leadership. And I think it brings in a community of shared struggle and in that way, greater trust.
So as a female leader, do you have any moments or did you have any moments of hindrance in your leadership journey?
As a female leader, it has been challenging, and as a woman of color. So there's a double challenge. As an Asian American woman, I come into a situation carrying my culture, my DNA that's infused with a sense of collective versus individual, and a very high value of hierarchy and deference to those who are in positions of leadership or have greater seniority. So I'm trying to harness my strengths while also being true to who I really am. And I don't want to lead like a man. I want to lead like a woman. And I bring in strengths that are part of my gifting, but also part of who I am embodied as a woman. So my lead foot will always be to be more collective. That's part of being a woman. It's also part of being an Asian American, where collective is my lead foot. So when I lead through decision making, I'm going to bring those strengths to the table. And instead of trying to be like a man, I'm learning to celebrate the fact that I bring in a gift mix that's needed in any given situation.
I couldn't agree more. So there is concern when it comes to diversity hiring. And so what tools and hiring tips do you have for leaders so that they are looking for those that have the best skill set and happen to be someone of diversity?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Being tokenized as a person of color is really demeaning in the end. I think people of color want to be hired because they possess excellence. My challenge, however, is for us to evaluate what our definition of good leadership looks like. When we look at leadership we are looking only through a lens of a certain type of articulate, confident, forceful leader, as that's the type of leader we want, I think we miss out. When you have a person who pursues excellence and is experienced, for example, in Asian culture, it is improper to self-promote. And so if you look at the boardrooms, there often is very little representation of Asian Americans. However, Asians are incredibly competent, but our DNA teaches us not to self-promote. So that is something to be aware of as you're hiring, that an Asian is not going to say, hey, look at my 15 things that I accomplished, when in fact they have accomplished 25 things, and they would be such an asset to the company. I would encourage leaders, especially those who are seeking to diversify, to be mindful of cultural dynamics, to be mindful of our lens by which we evaluate. And we truly are becoming increasingly more global, and having the voices of people who are mixed race or who come from different ethnic and even socioeconomic backgrounds actually will help us to become more effective and efficient in the end with a global audience.
Fantastic advice. So I have one more question. What advice would you give to other women that might be afraid to be where you're sitting today, in front of the camera, giving advice to other leaders?
You know, it's so interesting right now during this pandemic. We are all getting used to this Zoom format and being in front of a camera. I would say, as a leader, it's a good practice to always be moving into places where we feel uncomfortable. I think that keeps us learning and dependent and not relying on just what's worked in the past. I think more and more with the way that the world is getting smaller and the way that technology works, that we are constantly needing to update and improve. And so for those who are a little bit shy about it, push yourself a little bit more to get uncomfortable. It actually benefits so many to hear more voices. Those of you who don't want to be in front of a camera may be the very people we most need to hear from. So I'm speaking to you that absolutely doesn't want to just take that risk and push yourself a little bit further. I think you would benefit, your voice and your experience would benefit the greater good.
So this is kind of the question that we ask everyone in our series. How do we move forward out of the pandemic?
I think all of us are at a little bit of a loss because none of us have ever been here before. And so we are really faced with a leadership need and vacuum at a time unlike any other. I think this pandemic has actually been very exposing. I think it's really exposed our personal vulnerabilities and even our vulnerabilities societally. In that way, we are always better linking arms with one another and approaching the next steps with really, I think a diversity of experiences and voices will only help us to map out the best way forward. I think the days now of kind of the single pioneer, tip of the arrow leader, I think those days are gone. And to be honest, when I look around the world, some of the countries that have done the best have been led by women. And there's something to be said about the way that we lead as women that is more collective, that does take into consideration the viewpoints of others and differing viewpoints to be able to come to the best conclusion. So my advice, rather than trying to blaze ahead, is maybe take a moment to step back and assess what we have and where we're missing, and then together come up with a solution.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, for sharing your own personal experiences, as well as, showing us that there is a really positive way forward. So thanks so much for joining us, Vivian.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
For everyone watching today, I have a question for you. Is there someone in your life that is introverted that has a really important story to tell? We'd love to hear about them, and we'd love you to encourage them to use their voice. If you liked today's video, please follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified about everything Leader Impact. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.